We have an epic episode. We dive into smokability factor, the test that Dr. Riley is doing on smokability, on white ash, what causes it, nitrogen, phosphorus. We also go into diseases, pesticides, insecticides, all the different terpenes that affect the brain and the endocannabinoid system. We dive into all that. Epic episode. Growers, growgeneration.com stores nationwide. And we give you a discount. Every single sponsor you see on our pod, whether it's Grow Generation, Drip Hydro, Faven, or even Raw Rolling Papers, we hook you up. All you got to do is go to fsotd.com and you get hooked up with the newest discount codes for all our sponsors. And you also get priority access to a lot of drops. So go to the website and get linked up with Grow Generation for all your grow products, Drip Hydro for nutrients, and Faven under canopy lighting. And you know what we're smoking on the podcast. We've been smoking raw. We've been smoking elements for decades. That's who we rock with. This episode's for all the smokers. As soon as I heard she was coming into town, we had to get her on the pod. Wait till you hear this.
5 scientists that the government asked for their opinion on cannabis being safe or not, and 4 of the 5 said it's safe, it's fine. 1 said it was extremely harmful and could be addicting, and that led to a ton of press that led to where we are. So yeah, I think it's really important to listen to the lived experiences of people who have been using cannabis too, and create a voice for that. Cannabis has so many benefits because it's bioactive in the body. It does a lot of things in the body. Same thing with other plants like St. John's wort is what I think the video that you're talking about was referencing. So that has bioactive molecules too, and they can interact with other drugs. So it's important to treat your medicines like medicine and know what's in your body, especially if you're on multiple things. Our testing regulations so high that we're limiting our ability to sell quality cannabis without irradiation or some sort of method to bring back that flower after, especially outdoor grow too. Like it's almost impossible for microbials.
First Smoke family, big episode today. I'm really excited. I saw you make a post. I just want to preface this. And I was like, you have to come on First Smoke of the day. We got to talk. I absolutely love your content. We have Riley on the pod today. This is one for all smokers. Doesn't matter what you do. If you have anything to do with the plant, this is a podcast for you. Riley, welcome to First Smoke.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here. And thanks for sending me a message on Instagram, or I wouldn't have been able to be here. So thanks.
You were like, I'm coming to California. The first thing I did was go DM. Hey, so please come on First Smoke. We need to talk. Could you give us your background?
Absolutely. So there are some kind of big words here, but my background is in, I have a Ph.D. in pharmaceutical sciences, but my background really focuses on the chemistry of nature. So that includes plants, fungi, bacteria, and I study how they can be used as medicine. So before working in the cannabis industry, I studied other medicinal plants, but now I'm really focusing on cannabis for the most part.
I saw you get into, and we'll dive into the medicinal benefits. I saw you say not crossing some of these too, like antidepressants. I saw that post where you were saying, here's some natural antidepressants, made me think of cannabis, and then starting to mix them. And the first thing that came to my mind was like, people take vitamins all morning and stuff like that, and then they're smoking and they're literally mixing nonstop.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times when we think about natural products, we're not really thinking about like drug-drug interactions and something that, could cause any adverse health effects. But cannabis has so many benefits because it's bioactive in the body. It does a lot of things in the body. Same thing with other plants like St. John's wort is what I think the video that you're talking about was referencing. So that has bioactive molecules too, and they can interact with other drugs. So it's important to treat your medicines like medicine and know what's in your body, especially if you're on multiple things.
I want to dive into, you made a post about the California testing. And I saw the comments, it sparked a bunch of controversy because you're coming at it from an angle where you said like, where you look, you see, is what I thought. And I was like, wow, that is so true.
Yeah. So I feel like we're referencing the article that was published in the LA Times about pesticides in the legal cannabis market, which of course everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's so scary, right? Which it is very concerning. We should be worried about that. But also we were only testing the California market in that paper, in that study. So I think it's important to take those findings and say, where else could this be happening? It's not just a California problem. It's more of, do we need to be monitoring this everywhere and making sure that we have quality products in every state?
And do you think, coming from your background, like, is that something you think the lab could have a hand in, an issue? Is it just a whole chain of events that could happen? Yeah.
So the lab definitely, that could help with the issue there. The issue is we're already testing for a ton of these pesticides, right? Like I think California is testing for like 63 or something, like a large number. And the ones that were found were ones that were not being tested for, that were, I think, originated from China. And we just didn't know that they were being used in these, in cannabis products. So I think it's hard to say, hey, labs, can you do a better job? Because we don't know what to look for. It's hard. So we have like targeted analysis and untargeted analysis. So with targeted, that's things like terpenes and cannabinoids, where we're like, okay, we know these things are in here. Let's quantify and report them. But reporting things that you don't know are there or not, that takes untargeted analysis and really skilled people or machines to be able to pick out when things look wrong.
And way more expensive, I'm guessing.
Way more time consuming. That's the big thing, throughput in these labs. They have a lot of samples coming through them. So they need to make sure their throughput is still efficient. And so I think it's more of a bigger issue where we just need to have kind of checks and balances in place where somebody is regularly testing samples from all over the United States and then looking for everything. But it's random testing. So everybody needs to comply because you don't know when a sample is going to be tested for. I think that might be a more practical way to go about it as a way of checks and balances, just so people know somebody is looking, like your product might get tested, which we don't have right now.
And it's so interesting because half the time the stuff that pops or the stuff we hear about, we don't even know what it is.
Right.
You have to do research to figure out, like, what is this used in or for?
Right. Or might cause cancer, might be an estrogen disruptor. Okay, what does that mean if I smoke it? Is that pesticide still bad for you when it's smoked? Or does the smoking destroy the pesticide? There's other questions too. We don't know what happens during the combustion process. It could be worse for you. It could be less toxic. We don't really know. We haven't done those types of relevant studies yet to see what happens.
Do you think we're holding our cannabis to a higher standard than we hold our food to?
Oh my gosh, yeah, 100%. But we don't smoke our food. So there's also, I think, two ends of that, right? Because when you ingest something, like when you eat something, your liver is good at detoxifying things, of taking a molecule that might not be good for you and changing it in a way that makes it less toxic. When we're inhaling things, we don't have those mechanisms in place. So it's just like immediately to the bloodstream and the brain. So I do see why we have higher testing standards for inhalable products. I think that's really important, especially with people using this as medicine. I mean, I believe food is medicine too, but, I think we're going to have a reoccurring theme in this conversation on what is quality cannabis. And I think part of quality is not having these, potential toxicants that could get people more ill than be helping them.
And for people that want to know, we do a behind the scenes before and after the pod. It's called Off the Mic. It's only available on fsotd.com. And we were talking about ash content and ash color and a bunch of other stuff off the mic. But when you talk about black market versus white market, do you think that there's a big variation in quality of pesticide, meaning that if you were to test the black market, is it any dirtier than the white market, do you think? Or do you think it's just a toss up of like, who are you testing and what state is allowing things that should be pulled out?
I do think it's a toss up. I think in both markets, you have the ability to produce a quality product and to maybe get bigger yields, but produce a lower quality product. And oftentimes that is up to the cultivator, but also up to the people actually smoking it and whether they want to continue supporting that person or say, hey, I don't like the way that flower made me feel. I'm going to try a different product next time. But I think there's great players and I think there's not so great players in all markets. And realistically, we're working in more of a gray market everywhere. There's that too.
Yeah. You're based out of Canada?
No, I'm very close to Canada. I'm actually in northern New Hampshire, but I work a lot in Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont.
Oh, some good cannabis up there.
Yeah, Vermont and Maine have great weed.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like there's some real small batch guys I've been following forever that, it's just nice to see them like old school. They keep it on foundation. There's nothing too big. It's all small batch, super heady. And it's funny because we get them to reach out and they're like, we're out here doing it, They
are, especially in Vermont. I love, as far as like legal infrastructure goes, I think Vermont did a really good job and really trying to get more craft cultivators and less MSOs. And it worked. I mean, you drive through Vermont and there's quality cannabis, which a lot of legal markets don't necessarily have that standard.
Takes a decade.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little expensive, but it's good.
Well, I mean, what is cheap and great?
Well, and you go to Maine and it's too cheap too. And it's like, oh no, you feel, that market is kind of collapsing before your eyes. But yeah, the state infrastructure really kind of determines what happens to those cultivators, whether it's set up for success or set up for failure. And it's sometimes hard to tell until you're a year or so in.
This is random, but do you think interstate commerce would help? Let's say that all the states banded together that allow cannabis and said, hey, we're actually going to be able to carry, Vermont products in California products in Florida products, or would that expedite the overabundance of product we already have? It would be, a Band-Aid that eventually would have to get pulled off and the floodgate open.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I would say one thing I like about not having interstate commerce is just the idea of kind of going to an area and trying their cannabis and their kind of terroir and kind of what they represent there. I like how that is set up right now because you can taste and feel the difference in the different regions that you're in.
Yeah.
So I do like that one aspect, but I think it would help with the quality problem in some areas of, if they only have pretty poor quality cannabis and being able to bring some in that fills other needs in the market.
Yeah. Or would that put mom and pops out of business, and it's like now they're competing with, big farms that have been dialed for 10 years. Yeah, it is an interesting convo. One of your posts that I absolutely love is the nose knows. And we talk about this so much because people will say, I like this strain. A bunch of people will love the strain. You'll see it get really hyped. And then you'll have the people out there that are like, I absolutely hate it. I don't know why you people don't, why you like this strain.
Yeah.
Why? And it's like, yeah, every strain isn't for everybody. And it doesn't matter how great a strain is. It's still not for everybody. Mm-hmm. Like, could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this is part of how cannabis is personalized medicine. I always like to say that because to me, it really is. And when we say the nose knows, essentially what we're saying is when you smell one cultivar or one variety versus another, sometimes you literally just get a feeling of like, oh, this feels really good to my body. Like my body's telling me that it likes this smell. And then you try another one and it's like, ooh, it's almost like your body's pushing away from it. And this might, we might just say, oh, that's a feeling. Like that's a feeling we get, which it is. But we also have 400 or more smell receptors in our nose. And those receptors are linked to our immune system and our past memories of smell that we remember when we're younger and how those memories were positive or negative. And all of these lived experiences are so intimately tied to our smell. So when we smell the cannabis, like so much is happening in our brain. And being able to take the time and listen to your body and say, okay, my body's telling me that it likes the aroma of this. And that's happening at a molecular level. When you smell anything, those are molecules hitting receptors in your nose, whether that's something like cannabis that smells great or something like poop, which smells bad, that's still molecules hitting receptors in your nose. And when we think about those same molecules, when we roll it up and smoke it, they're going to be entering our body and interacting with similar receptors. So if you get that positive reaction from smell, it likely means that you're going to have a positive reaction in your body from the receptors inside of you.
So it's like almost like your body's saying like yes or no.
Literally yes. Yeah, more, less.
And
yes,
some
no.
people love to abuse themselves. So just know that, some people love smoking GMO and Chem Dog and OG, which is an offensive smell, right? But people love that.
Smelled OG today and I said, that's OG. Yeah, for sure.
But for some people's bodies, that's probably like, I love this.
Exactly.
It's a warm, blanket.
Cultivators, under canopy lighting is changing the game. And with that, Faven Under Canopy Lighting. They're one of our premier sponsors, and it's a brand we truly believe in. If you want to check out favenlighting.com, you can get all the answers to what under canopy is and is how it's changing the game. And guess what? You're family. So we hook you up. The code is FSOTD, and you get hooked up with Faven Lighting. They put together a full layout of how you would set your facility or grow room up using their under canopy lighting. Whether you're using CMH, double-ended, fluorescents, LEDs, it doesn't matter. Faven Lighting has you covered. Go to favenlighting.com, use the code FSOTD, get hooked up, and change your grow game. Come on, cultivators.
Mm-hmm. And then you learn too, as you learn what you like and you don't like, and you start to have more of a collection of, strains at home, then you start to understand daytime versus nighttime, or these different kind of ebbs and flows throughout the day. And even though you might like the smell of 8 different varieties in front of you, you can say, okay, what do I want right now though? Like what does my body want right now based on, what time of day it is, if I've eaten, if I'm going to be active, if I'm going to be sitting down, if I'm going to be social, if I'm not, like all of those different factors.
You went into how certain cannabinoids or certain terpenes affect mood. And if you could maybe dive into some of the knowledge that you have with that.
Yeah. And I think we have way more data for specifically like the uplifting varieties, that specifically people who have maybe like an ADHD type brain, which I definitely do. And I think we should talk about this later too, about just different types of brain and different types of weed.
Let's dive into, I think most of the people watching this are probably like rolling up, planting plants, trimming.
Always doing 10 things at once.
Welcome to that life.
Yeah. So like, strains that have a lot of terpinolene in them. I mentioned Jack Herrera because it's my favorite of all time. I grow Jack. I love Jack. Just, it tickles the brain in a perfect way. And for people with brains that are maybe hyperactive, terpinolene rich varieties literally just act almost like an Adderall. I mean, it locks you in, it focuses you. I don't feel high when I smoke a lot of those varieties because it's literally like I'm so locked in. I call it work weed. Like that's my daytime focus, work weed. It's amazing. And we have data to support that specifically looking at like indica versus sativa versus hybrid products that are on the market. Some researchers did a study to look, because we would think that if all indicas made you sleepy and all sativas made you feel really awake, there had to be some sort of chemistry to explain that, right? Not really the case for indicas. We don't see a ton of correlation there, at least for what's on the legal market. Let's be clear about that. But with sativas, terpinolene, there was a strong correlation that terpinolene equals sativa, or at least part of the story. There's also other terpenes involved in that, like beta-farnesene, which is another terpene that's almost always found with terpinolene. So they're likely kind of this combination of terpenes that's great for uplifting effects. So
the entourage effect is true.
Oh, it's so true. And the entourage effect goes so much deeper than we think about the entourage effect. Okay, small detour. But so we think of the entourage effect when we think about the cannabis plant as it producing all of these different molecules, terpenes, cannabinoids, flavonoids, all of them. But then how we consume cannabis changes that entourage. So if we are smoking cannabis, that entourage is getting larger because when we light cannabis on fire, we're producing more chemistry. We now have more compounds entering our body that are tickling receptors in a different way compared to if you were to eat edibles, for example, different consumption method. Now your liver is processing THC, your liver is processing CBD, all of these different molecules, and it's changing them in a different way. So now your entourage looks different. Now your entourage has these metabolites of cannabinoids and terpenes, and it's going to make you feel different compared to if you vape it, if you smoke it, if you use a topical. Like that entourage effect changes based on how we're consuming cannabis.
So you can use it accordingly.
Yes. And I think it's a super underutilized tool. I mean, a lot of people say, I love smoking weed. I smoke weed, and that's fine. Like, you do you. I love smoking weed too. Yeah. But, I think if you're looking for that really uplifting daytime effect, maybe you want to like dry herb vape at a lower temperature. So a lot of those monoterpenes that are energizing and you get more of that flavorful terpene hit that's going to help with that uplifting effect. And you're not going to get a lot of that transformation of THC to CBN that makes us feel a little more sedating when we're smoking at high temperatures. So I think there are ways to kind of curate your experience with both the strains that you're using and the consumption method that you're using. But that's also can get a little expensive if you're like, okay, have your edibles, have your dry herb vape, have your concentrates, have your smoke.
I guess that's what's for your plant minimums for. You know, like especially with edibles and you talk about, topicals and stuff, that would be perfect because, not to say quality doesn't matter as much, but you're growing for resin, not finished flower. There's you can cut it a little earlier. You can get effects different.
Absolutely. Although I will say Entourage Effect still matters with topicals because terpenes like pinene and limonene have been shown to help with the penetration of THC and CBD through the skin. So if you have those terpenes present, you get better penetration of those cannabinoids.
That's probably why you want full spectrum, I'm guessing. Okay. That makes total sense. Like with GMO and ChemDog, you went into the terpene that it's known for and that it has in common with actual feces. That was so crazy. I was like laughing because I was like, it makes sense scientifically, as someone who cultivates to be like, yeah, of course. But just as like a consumer, you're like, that's trippy.
Well, right. And you don't want to be like, your weed smells like shit.
Like the strain dog shit.
But it actually smells like shit. And for some more background knowledge on this, the really, really, really savory smelling varieties, like you were mentioning, GMO, ChemDog, they contain these molecules called scatol and indole. And scatol specifically smells like poop. Like it literally is the molecule that makes poop smell like poop. Now it's only present in cannabis in like super, super, super small amounts. So it's not like it's as dank as the actual feces. But it is present. That molecule is present in there. And even more interesting, I think, is scatol and indole, the actual molecules responsible for that poop smell, their molecular structure is the same core as DMT and these other very powerful psychedelics. And there's a theory that those really savory smelling varieties might contribute to that really euphoric, almost spiritual feeling that you get with some varieties, but sometimes not others. But that's just a theory right now. Wow, that is really cool. That is so interesting. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Abstracts Tech, who's doing a lot of this research here in California. This whole category of these like other smelly things other than terpenes, they call them flavorants. And they really coined that term in 2023 when they published a paper that was identifying all of these other smells. Because we always talk about the top terpenes. These are the 3 top terpenes. These are the 3 top terpenes. And that's a great way to help guide you. But I think especially cultivators, but also stoners know that there's more nuance to that smell than just terpenes. There's depths of that smell that terpenes don't cover. And it's these other small molecules that are not terpenes that contribute to that really exotic aroma of some varieties. Wow. It makes me think that, and tell me if I'm correct, that you could probably breed towards that. So if you really knew the flavonoids and the terpenes you wanted, right? Flavorants. Because there's flavonoids too, which is really confusing. And they always get mixed up. So what are you looking for? An overlap of certain things that come together or create that profile? Yeah. If I was saying I want to breed a strain that's so obnoxious, that is so high in that specific profile, you could do that if you knew what you were going for, because some strains maybe have just a slight amount, but it's present, it's in there. So if you can gather these strains and start to tinker with the breeding process, I wonder if you could, really, let's say if it's at, 0.8 or 0.04, whatever the content is now of that, amp that up. Yeah, no, 100%. And they actually just published something on the breeding for flavorants. And they haven't really identified exactly what to do. But essentially what they said is what we're missing, the missing link, is testing labs being able to test for these compounds, because back to the nose, breeders for a long time have gone off their nose because it's the most sensitive thing that we have to measure aroma right now. You know, even if you were to send that sample to a testing lab, it's not going to be able to tell you that flavorant profile. So until that's available at labs, we're going to have to trust the nose of the breeder, which I think is kind of cool right now. But I do predict that we'll see panels coming out for these additional smelly compounds probably in the next year or so. And I know people are working on, you know, producing those standards and making them commercial so that they can be analyzed. Although I will say the methodology that they use is very niche methodology. So not a lot of labs actually have the machinery to run for these samples right now. But not to say they couldn't get them in the future, or not to say that you couldn't modify a different method to be able to analyze them.
For cannabis testing specifically, with what you're talking about, is there crossover with labs that do other things? Why is there such a gap with cannabis testing in general?
Yeah, there are a lot of labs that are now diversified. So they're either doing food testing as well as cannabis testing, or they're just doing supplement testing along with cannabis. So things like kava and kratom, which are other natural products that we're going to analyze in a similar way as cannabis. They're kind of expanding into that because it is hard to make money as a lab. It's hard to make money as anyone in the cannabis industry. And, you know, as a lab too, like they are a business. And a lot of times when we think of science, we think of these like altruistic people that do things for the good of humanity. But like we also need to get paid. And this is also where the potency inflation problem comes in, because unfortunately some people can be paid off, and you know that's the lab's trying to stay afloat, but at the same time, you know, we do need accurate lab testing. So
and probably upgraded equipment constantly.
Yeah.
So it's like they need to make money, and not only make money to live, but they need to reinvest in the business if that's what we're all looking to do, right?
Exactly.
If we need stabilization where you can send samples to 20 different labs and get similar, if not the same results.
Right. Like within 3% or something. But right now we see like it's within like 20%.
You don't even know.
Yeah. So
some people are just like, stay away from this lab, use this lab, and everything is just pseudoscience.
Right.
Because it's us saying like, they seem to know their stuff. I don't know about them. And it's like, well, what does that mean?
Do we go off Yelp reviews? Like, what are we supposed to do? It is, I think we need a system of checks and balances. And we're starting to see some like nonprofits emerge, at least on the East Coast. I've seen this happen where they're acting as a checks and balances of saying like, hey, our government isn't doing this, so we're going to do it. And we're going to start, you know, buying products from different places and seeing if the report matches what's on the COA. And plot twist, it's not. And it's a big problem, especially on the East Coast. I'm sure it's a big problem out here too, but that's just more of where I'm operating.
Do you think that some cannabis gets thrown out for it failing testing on things that are harmless? Because like I always wonder too, like I'm looking down this list of things and you wonder sometimes like, do we know that all this is harmful?
That's a really good question. And I think this also comes back to quality of, are our testing regulations so high that we're limiting our ability to sell quality cannabis without irradiation or some sort of method to, bring back that flower after, especially outdoor grow too. Like it's almost impossible for microbials. So I would say yes, that's probably a case sometimes that products are unfortunately not being able to be sold because of these really tight testing regulations. But I do think we may need different standards for med versus adult use. That might be a good step of saying, okay, medical patients who absolutely have no leniency as far as quality, like we need to have the highest testing standards for these people. And then maybe people who are healthier and don't have any underlying conditions, they could have more lax testing standards, allow for maybe a little better drying cure and a little more diversity in that product. Because as we know, like not all microbials are bad. A lot of them are positive, but that is what's causing a lot of flower to fail. And then that causes irradiation to happen. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on quality flower post-irradiation? I feel like it's a big conversation in the cannabis industry, but we don't talk about it enough.
Well, because it's more international.
Yeah.
Like right now. And you're talking, like, will you explain a little bit of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So if a product fails for microbials, so bacteria and fungi, and if you still want to sell that on the legal market, you can go through this process of irradiation, which is exposing that flower to gamma radiation, which would kill all the living organisms like bacteria and fungi. So they would be dead. But the flower, in theory, actually, I did see a study that the terpene profile was not altered. So I think that's promising, but I just like to get cultivators and just smokers' opinions on this because I'm still developing my own opinion.
First Smoke family, we're a grow generation where we get hooked up with grow supplies, trap supplies, lighting, nutrients, whether you're cloning on a Sunday or whether you're trapping on a Monday. It's growgeneration.com. Stores also nationwide. But if you want to get hooked up, we have a code. It's our family code. It's First Smoke 10. No matter if you're in store or online, you get hooked up like family, just like we are. Growgeneration.com, grow stores nationwide.
Well, we sat down with Sherbinski a few episodes ago,
cool.
And we started to talk really deeply, for anyone who hasn't seen that yet, about international cannabis, it moving from Canada to Portugal to Argentina, all these different international hubs, and it's starting to move around the world, and some of the testing structure and standards for international cannabis being so different than California State or Michigan State or wherever. And then just by listening to him speaking about it, the first thing that came to my mind was there's so many OGs in this market who feel like they've been left out or left behind. And all I kept thinking about, and I do this a lot with combos, is there's so much open space to innovate. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it takes money and investors and partners probably for most people. But when I'm hearing what's happening in the international space of like, well, this is how they do it, and it all gets ruined or it turns yellow or the flower turns orange, but that's just what you got to do. All I think about is there's guys out there right now who are such good cultivators and such good scientists, GCs, general contractors, electricians, like masters of their trades. And they can't find their place in cannabis. It's like innovation.
Yeah.
You end up innovating in a space like international cannabis trade on how to UV. Like, yes, it's tough. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, an idea is different than execution. But I just always go to think bigger. There's so much innovation in this space that still needs to happen that we're in like step 2 of 50.
Isn't that crazy to think about?
It is. In our lifetime, we'll stay in step 2. That's what's even crazier.
No, we got to get to step 3.
15 years ago, I guess it would be, about 15 years ago almost, I'm over a decade into growing and I'm like 5 more years. It'll be federally legal.
I've been saying 5 years. This is literally a joke, like where I work, that I've been saying 5 years for so long.
My buddy put me on game one time. He said, don't think of federal legalization ever as years. Think about it as presidencies. Wow. And think about which presidency you think would create legalization. And now you'll get a more timeline, a better timeline of how long it will really take. And I was like, damn, that I don't even know. That pushes it out another 15, 20 years, maybe.
Ooh.
It's interesting. It's so interesting where with your background too in cannabis, we rarely get to have people on who advocate the way you do.
Yeah, I think it's really, really, really important for scientists to advocate, especially for cannabis and natural products and just medicines in general. I mean, when cannabis first started to become illegal in the United States, it was a scientist that was part of that story of what it made it happen. There was 5 scientists that the government asked for their opinion on cannabis, like being safe or not. And 4 of the 5 said it's safe, it's fine. 1 said it was extremely harmful and could be addicting. And that led to a ton of press, that led to fear mongering, that led to reefer madness, that led to where we are. So yeah, I think it's really important to not only look at the facts. I mean, we have over 30,000 published papers on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. that's important to read those papers because we have a lot of locked up knowledge in there, but also to listen to the lived experiences of people who have been using cannabis too, and create a voice for that, because we've been silenced for so long. We still are. If anyone's on social media, you know that we're silenced.
Insane. Insane.
Yeah. So it's really important that as many people as possible have a voice from as diverse backgrounds as possible, and that we show up to things. We show up when your state has a bill that's being put up for access to this medicine. You have to show up. You have to bring people with you. And I always speak on the subject, and I always say, my name's Dr. Riley Kirk. I have a Ph.D. in pharmaceutical sciences, and I use cannabis every single day. It's always how I introduce myself. And I always get questions of so can I just ask why you use cannabis? And I'm like, no, you can't. I mean, I'll answer it, but that's not the point here. The point is that there are there's lawyers, there's doctors, there's moms and dads, there's every person in society, all shapes and sizes. We're all using cannabis, but we don't have safe access to the medicine right now. We don't have quality, and we just need to raise the voices from the community to show that we're here and we want access.
Yeah,
constantly.
And maybe I can add, celebrate each other's differences. Mm-hmm. There are so many creatives in this space, and so many times people want to push them to the wayside because with being a creative comes other creative juices that shoot out, right? Like a bright star shines in every direction.
Yeah. Right.
And we have so many amazing people who chose this as a life and a path for them. Celebrate that, bring them in, something like we're sitting down to now, and not everyone's a grower, not everyone's a hash maker, not everyone adds to this conversation in that way. And that's amazing.
Yes. And this is a huge advocacy push we're doing. It's called Weird Brains. And Weird Brains is essentially emphasizing how many weird people are in the cannabis industry and how this industry is kind of a sanctuary for weird brains, especially if you tried other careers and it didn't work out because you always felt left out, or you always felt like you had to hide your cannabis consumption because it wasn't allowed at whatever job you were doing. There's so many brilliant people in this industry who literally think better and do better with cannabis, and kind of showing that to the world of no, this isn't just a relax at the end of the day thing. This is a wake up and medicate all day long for a lot of people. So we do that as an advocacy push for the industry, but also for neurodivergent folks, whether you're in the industry or outside the industry. That's ADHD, autism, OCD, bipolar, all kinds of weird brains, as we call them, often gravitate towards cannabis because the way cannabis works in the body is bringing regulation, bringing balance. That's what the endocannabinoid system does. Its whole purpose is to bring balance in the body. And for a lot of these really complex conditions, we don't have a medicine for them because they're complex. It's not just a single pharmaceutical that's going to fix them. We need that polypharmacology from all these different cannabinoids and terpenes. And it's a really unique medicine, and it works in a really unique way. So people with weird brains often not only gravitate towards this medicine, but gravitate towards the community that accepts and uses the medicine as well. And I think we really need to cultivate that, which we've seen literally forever with smoke circles and sharing that experience in that community, and kind of just bringing words to it and bringing a voice to it. So people outside the cannabis industry also see how much we benefit from it.
Some of the offshoot effects of good cannabis is, for me, I call it psychoactive cannabinoids, because certain strains, especially Skittles and things like that, I'll immediately get creative. Mm-hmm. I find myself starting to draw or write new strain names down, or I'm doing this, and I catch myself midway through, look at you. Okay, this is working. This is something, there's something special to this strain. Could you dive into that a little bit? Because I know you went into munchies and why munchies happen, but why would a strain like that kick on my creative juices?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a way it's sort of, you could compare it almost to psychedelics, how it can expand your way of thinking. But I think a lot of that too is just suppressing some of the negative things that we have going on of being I'm so busy, I need to do this, I need to do this, but we have that clouded brain where we can't just sit and think about something and focus on something. Whereas if we use some strains, some varieties, they really can just help us kind of focus and lock in. And allow our brain to kind of diverge in unique ways and just allow those brain paths to be explored a little further than the very quick linear path we're always on, especially as Americans. We're like work, 24/7. And being creative is still working, but it's just funneling that energy in a different way than maybe you're used to without cannabis.
Oh, I love that. It's not turning things up, it's turning other things down.
Yeah.
I love that thought process. That's so true. It kind of puts it in way better perspective.
Well, I remember I was at Harvard one time listening to a woman. I'm not going to mention her because I'm going to say something kind of negative, but I was listening to her speak about how cannabis diminished this one part of the brain. Like it lowered, I don't even know what the actual part of the brain was responsible for, but she was presenting the data in a negative way, saying cannabis slows the brain activity in this part of the brain. And I turned to the other scientist I was with and I was like, but that's all they were looking for. Did it turn up anything else? Like, could it have turned down that part of the brain, but turned up the creative or the social aspects of the brain that she wasn't looking at as a scientist? Because I think it's really important not to like pat ourselves on the back for what our nonprofit research organization's doing. But myself and the other co-founder, we're stoners. We love smoking weed and we know what to look for in the data and the community as well. We know what questions to ask for like quality of life, for endpoints, for quality of cannabis. And if you look at the other peer-reviewed studies, I mentioned we had like 30,000 peer-reviewed studies. That's great, but almost none of them are done by someone in the industry or someone who uses cannabis. So there's always that sort of not full coverage of the topic, or you're missing a lot of that nuance, because even like from the consumption methods that they're using during the study, or like how long after inhalation they're looking for the effects, like there's always discrepancies where it's like you can tell that you're not intertwined with the cannabis community. And I think if we had more researchers who are passionate about the plant and researching it, we'd get more and more relevant studies out there that would really help represent the cannabis community and all the good that cannabis has done for us.
Yeah, Reefer Madness did a number on the country, set us back so far, and like it's comical now to look back on it, but that's why we don't have these researchers that are our mom and dad's ages. They were, until we got involved and until now, that age group was like, holy shit, we thought it was horrific. They would have rather taken acid or LSD and thought that was safer than cannabis sometimes. Right. I swear.
That's what they were taught.
It's insane to think. So beautiful that now we have access to so much information. Where would you think, like if someone wanted to read more on like cannabis and the cannabinoid system and some of the research that's been done, like where do you go? Yeah,
well, first I'm going to point you to our website. So head to appliedpharmacognosy.org, and that's pharma, PHARMACOGNOSY.org. You can learn about what our nonprofit's doing with these different projects and learn about the endocannabinoid system and cannabis. But also I would say, YouTube's a good resource, but also some papers are decently easy to read. If you do want to dive into the literature at all, you can go to PubMed and you can just type in endocannabinoid system. If you're looking into something like endocannabinoid system and anxiety, just type that in with the word and you'll get papers that are relevant to those things. But I think, again, a lot of the issue is we don't really have people breaking down the science right now. And I hate to say it, but AI might be the person to finally like break down a lot of these papers.
Wow.
Have you seen what AI can do with those podcast things?
Every single time someone comes to me and says, have you seen this AI? And then they preface whatever's happening, I'm always like, wait, what? Every time it's crazier. Hey, they're doing all their strain art for their bags on AI, and all they're doing is figuring out the right prompt. Right. And then it goes to, oh, well, not just that, we're doing paintings. Oh, not just paintings, we're doing strain reviews. Oh, not strain reviews, we're finding SEO tactics on website. And it just keep the ripple effect. And then I saw Mark Zuckerberg do the thing where now they can make your mouth move in Spanish. So we could take the clip from this podcast, put it in full Spanish, and then our mouths would match the words in Spanish so that it looks like we're speaking fluent Spanish on the same podcast. And
that's insane.
That's going to be built in. That'll just be an extra feature where he's saying for, X amount per month, you have access to this. You could put it in 6 languages and then send it out, post it.
Man, I was battling it for a while, and then I realized that I was the loser in the situation, and I can't be doing that. But especially, honestly, like helping with data analysis, we have some data sets. We have a longitudinal study on. We have over 7,000 people with over 2 weeks of data for each person, which equals over 13 million rows of data. Like that's a lot of data. And it's not something you can like look at on Excel. Like we're beyond that. And just using AI to help us with coding, to help us figure out coding in an easier way has been insanely helpful. I'm not going to lie. Like
you're saying you could basically upload those with a prompt and get results.
Yeah,
Why
or at least like we were already coding, but if we get tripped up while we're coding, it helps us figure out the path forward, which before you kind of had to rely on these like forums online and it was like hit or miss. And now you have a brilliant robot, which is crazy, but
it sounds like cannabis.
The shopping spree begins. Cultivators globally trust Drip Hydro. Whether your nutrient solution is in powder form or liquid form, Drip's got you covered. And you know we treat you like family. First Smoke 10 is the discount code. Whether you're in store or online at driphydro.com, doesn't matter. We get you hooked up. driphydro.com. Clean, effective, affordable. First Smoke family, no matter the guest, you know we're rocking raw and Elements papers. Whether it's the Elements king size wide, the raw fatties without the crease, so you still get the king size wide, but with unbleached and uncreased. Something we've been loving on the show is the raw king size blacks. And when we're lighting up, the Phoenix. This is awesome. Flintless residue, windscreen with a poker. No matter what products you like from Raw, you can check out genuineraw.com and that gets you to all their affiliate links to purchase these products direct from them to make sure they're raw authentic. Genuineraw.com, First Smoke of the Day sent you.
But I will say, yeah, something that we have also done using this tool is we've created a program. This goes to Science of Smokeability, if you don't mind me hopping over there.
I was just about to lead into it as I'm smoking this joint.
I'm going to light this up in a second too, once I stop yapping.
Dr. Justice.
Yes, Dr. Allison Justice, Dr. Miyabi Shields, Dr. Marcus Rogan, Ashley Manning, and myself.
You got to get into what you're doing.
Yeah. So
this is going to be a hot topic for years.
Yeah. So it's called the Science of Smokeability, or S.O.S. And really what we're trying to do is a multi-year, multi-phase study. And we're trying to figure out what constitutes quality cannabis. And it may seem like such an easy endpoint, but it's really not. I mean, our phase 1 of Science of Smokeability is we were just looking into water activity of 0.45, 0.65, and 0.85. And then we have different components of Science of Smokeability. So one component of it is we have a literal smoking machine, and it's really cool. You feed it joints. So it's kind of about the size of, what's that, a toaster oven? Kind of about the size of a toaster oven. And you program it to set a smoking profile. And then you put in a joint and it smokes the joint for you. And we collect the smoke condensate. So as it's smoking, we're collecting samples. We're also measuring like how strong it's pulling, how much resistance, that kind of stuff. And then we analyze the smoke sample to see what chemistry is being produced. So as we move through the Science of Smokeability, we're testing water activity. We're going to test nutrient flushing. We're going to test, starches versus sugars for sweetness. We're going to test hopefully things like living soil. Hopefully this lives on for a pretty long time, but really focusing on the dry and the cure, but also cultivation to see from both a chemical standpoint, but also from a user standpoint, how people report quality cannabis. So we actually have kind of a network of people that are signed up for Science of Smokeability, and whichever phase that we're able to do it, we send out pre-rolls that are whatever, metric we're looking at, and people take a survey and say, this one smoked really good. And we have this ash card that goes from white to black, and they report like the number that corresponds to the ash color. And then, they rate like how harsh it was, how much resin was produced, the actual volume of the smoke, or like how thick the smoke was, what the taste was like. We can't do this for every phase. For instance, the next phase is on nutrient flushing. And this is really, really important from a health safety standpoint because we were talking about nutrient flushing. And you might just think, okay, flushing makes it taste good or bad, whatever, right? There's more to the story because from a chemical standpoint, there's a potential that if you're not flushing, that there's excessive nitrogen in there that when smoked could turn into carcinogens. This is very well known in the tobacco world. They're called nitrosamines that are produced in cancer-causing compounds. And we don't know if these are produced in the cannabis smoking process because usually there's, we're not putting that much nitrogen into it. But if someone didn't flush and they did have a lot of nitrogen, we want to know what that looks like from a chemical standpoint, if it could potentially be harmful to people to smoke unflushed flower.
So you're saying that because people always want to start to poke holes in the white ash theory, and the white ash theory meaning it doesn't mean that it's quality if it has white ashes. Nothing is black and white. There's always going to be people who can add phosphorus or add nitrogen, overdose the plant on nitrogen, and it burns neon white, or they can play games and manipulate. You're manipulating out of the bounds of, like, in my opinion, real quality. You're cheating the system to get there. Okay, well, you're a good cheater.
That's what the tobacco industry has done. Their research was just focused on like a smooth smoke, but they didn't really care about what was safe for the consumer. So you might see, you'll see a lot of added things, whether that's like glycerol to make it sweeter, or, additional things to slow down the smoking process. And we don't want to add those things to cannabis. We know people aren't adding all of those things. But we do need an objective way to look at it and say, okay, the chemistry in this one could be more harmful than the chemistry in this one. Chemistry doesn't lie. Like if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. So I think it's really important to get both aspects of, the subjective experience of the smoker, because so many people have different preferences. The subjective experience of the smoker, but the objective analysis of chemistry as well. And together we can start to build that story. And again, like we did water activity. We haven't published those results yet, but that's only part of the story. It's just a tiny piece of the puzzle. There's so much more to it. And I also want to add here, like, I'm not the world expert on quality cannabis. A lot of what we do is learning and engaging from the stoner community, because we know that we collectively are the experts. We collectively do hold a lot of these answers. We just need the way that we need an avenue for people to talk to researchers and say, hey, I think this might contribute, or hey, I'd love to, offer my expertise. Because especially looking at cannabis research, for a very, very, very long time, we were not able to research cannabis. And if it was being researched, it was being researched in a really, really negative light. So cannabis consumers didn't want to contribute to that research because they'd be contributing to the narrative that cannabis is bad. So again, this is why it's so important to have cannabis advocates as researchers, because you're building that trust, and that trust has been gone for a really long time. And to rebuild that trust in research and eventually maybe in academia, that's, I think, where it's most impactful, is that we can tell that narrative from a community perspective.
Well, I like too that you have to also take one step back and say, who was actually subjecting themselves to these data sets previously? Because successful people who smoke cannabis don't want to be part of stuff like that. Yeah. And maybe now, but 10 to 15 years ago, if a doctor smoked weed instead of drank at the end of the day, or anything, use cannabis in general, or anyone where their profession was on the line, they're not getting into that data set, but that's who we need as well.
Yeah.
How can you function at such a high rate with this product versus someone who's saying, for $50, I'll smoke weed and tell you how I feel. Right. It's a different person, especially 15, 20 years ago. So it's like,
that's a great point. Yeah.
It's who they say actually fill out polls. They say 1% of people fill out polls.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's pretty wealthy white people who have the time to do it. Like that's actually statistically real, which is a huge problem.
Well, you need to know that going into the experiment.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm experimenting on. It's like you're not getting everybody or the whole group. So you need to know, with Dr. Justice and that project, the smokability, I am so interested because something gets brought up a lot is, well, why do cigarettes burn white? Because white ash can't be good if cigarettes burn white. It doesn't mean anything. And I always go to just Google that. We talked about this.
Yeah.
Like, just Google, why do cigarettes burn white? And the first 4 or 5 websites go into the studies. It talks about how they add things to make
They add a lot of things.
So it's not apples to apples or oranges to oranges. There is a difference there. And then there are always going to be people who manipulate cannabis to get the results they want. But in that main highway, that main vein, there's people who are doing it proper. And I always go to Ash's one checkbox. If there's 6 to 8 or 10 checkboxes, flavor, effects, looks, whatever it is, and everyone's is different, right? Like we get mixed up on, well, this is how I enjoy cannabis, so you have to have the same effect, and so you have to enjoy it the same way.
I agree. Yeah, it is a little intense at a lot of times, but I will say I do think there is something behind white or ash compared to black or ash. I mean, the worst weed I've ever smoked in my life was very, very dark ash. But I've had a lot of good weed that smoked elsewhere on the spectrum. So I don't think it's, as you said, like black and white. I think it's literally in the gray, like in the gray of the ash color. But I want to say another thing that, first of all, Dr. Justice is so cool. I just wanted to publicly put that out there. Dr. Allison Justice is so cool. And Dr. Justice and I were together running the first smoking experiments for Science of Smokeability. And as we're doing it, we took regular breaks and we're outside chiefing, like as you do, because we can smoke weed and do research, because we can be functional with weed. And what we noticed is the way the machine was puffing, the smoking machine, immediately we said, that doesn't look like the smoking profile of anybody that I know. Like that is, because it was designed after cigarette smoking. It was not designed after weed smoking. So after doing phase 1 of Science of Smokeability, we kind of got together and said, we need to develop a new method for this that represents cannabis smokers better than this method, because we're so early in the Science of Smokeability that if we do this now, all of our future experiments are going to represent weed smokers. So actually, we've already started collecting data on this, but it's called the puff topography of your puff. And so we're going to different events. We just went to the Freedom Rally in Boston. We're going to NECAN in Syracuse, New York, and we'll be at MJ Biz in December.
I love this.
Oh, it's so cool.
This is so cool.
And it measures how strong and how long you're puffing, as well as the duration between puffs. And then we're going to take essentially the average of everybody that we measure and make a new method for our smoking machine that actually represents the cannabis community. So it's really cool. The algorithm that we've made you can like see it in real time, your puff topography happening. And it's so cool. We were talking to the Dank Duchess and we were seeing her puff topography, and she's a double puffer, and she's our first double puffer we have. So she takes 2 quick hits, and then like that's her puff topography. And it's so cool comparing different people. And it's like you almost have signatures of how you puff.
I need this printed out, and I'm going to make it into art.
Here.
I need it in art. I'm going to frame it. Here's how I smoke.
We literally want that at MJ Biz, to have a way to print off your topography.
Epic. That is so cool. It's almost like your signature.
Exactly.
And everyone has this signature of how they smoke, and oh wow, that is so different.
Even the way you light it. Like people light it differently. And like, a lot of people, me included, you'll light the end a lot and then you'll take some quick puffs to kind of get it going so it doesn't canoe. Some people do that. Some people don't. You can see the differences in the topography. It's
like a beat to a song.
Right?
Yeah, that's so cool.
That would actually be kind of cool to put that into a music generator thing.
Oh man, there's so much innovation in this space, and it's in every aspect. I love to see women in cannabis as well. You're such a great representation of women in cannabis, if you don't mind me saying. And
thank you. I appreciate that.
I love to see, like, we've had Alice from Wook Sauce Winery. We've had Anna from Cam.
Cool.
We've had Dragonfly Earth Medicine. I mean, we just really try to highlight females that are doing amazing stuff, and not just because they're females, but because, like, damn, look at this. Like, this is something that needs to be celebrated. And we've needed this in the space for so long. So many growers want to know, does white ash matter? Does a flush matter? And we're kind of finding out like, yeah, it possibly could matter.
Well, everything matters. Like I kind of say that a lot, but we're always like, does this specific factor matter in quality or in experience? Of course it does. It's a living plant. And when we manipulate one thing, it's going to adjust and manipulate itself in different ways. And another thing that I think really adds to the complexity and the nuance of Science of Smokeability, especially when talking about dry and cure, different strains likely need to be dried and cured quite differently, as you know, as a cultivator.
It's not black or white.
It's not black or white. So it's not like we're trying to say like, here's a standardized method that everybody should use all the time for their dry and cure. It's more of just like, at the end of Science of Smokeability, is it possible that we could have some sort of metric that can help a consumer look at a product and have some sort of gauge of quality without opening the bag? Because I think that's kind of what we're missing in the industry, is a lot of it is based on vibes and marketing. But again, especially for those med patients, for people who need that quality, we need a way of making sure that we're providing that quality and communicating that quality.
Yeah, because right now it's a lot of people looking to other people. I trust him, or
exactly.
I know he knows good weed or good product or good edibles or good tinctures or whatever your product is. And it's like, well, that's what I'm going to use then. And you're like, I mean, there's so many other factors.
And it's worked for a long time and it's still working. But as the industry expands and as we encroach on, federal legalization in the next 5 years, it's something that I do think we're going to need some sort of metric on. Even things like a quality pre-roll. What's a quality pre-roll? Because right now, like, you can put trim in a pre-roll and you can put premium bud in a pre-roll. How do we know which is which other than price?
So a lot of people don't buy them because of that.
Well, right. But what if we had a way to say, no, this one's actually really good. Like, this one will smoke good. This one has flavor.
Like that.
Like this one.
That's what I'm saying. And that's why it's tough, because we'll do connoisseur stuff. And in the circles of brand owners and guys and growers and hash makers and creatives, let's say, in this space, the stuff that gets passed around is so exceptional sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get that to transfer to rec market, especially with taxation right now. It's weird how some states kind of got it right or got close to right.
Got it better,
And then some states are just so far off that it's like, even if we cut it in half, we're still higher than other places. Like,
well, what's really scary is like how they make these decisions on taxation too. I'm part of the New Hampshire advisory board for cannabis. We do not have an adult use market right now. We're working towards it. But, when they're trying to decide on the percent of taxation, they're just tossing out numbers and going, well, Vermont does this and, well, New York does this. And I'm like, so how do we get to that number? Like, what do we want to crunch our own numbers maybe and see if that's fitting for us? Like, do we have any financial person involved here?
What's the scale? How many licenses? Maybe that all plays a factor in a spreadsheet of, well, we should charge, it's crazy too, because I was in Colorado in like 2009, 10, right? When they were starting to write the laws and they were trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. That's what kept getting brought up, because it just, when you open the gates are fully open.
Yeah.
You see it in Thailand now, but there's no going back. So then it's this battle of, let's just make a bunch of money off of it. But you're letting in big business, small business. It's just, these conversations are so nuanced. And I just want people to realize that it's very rarely, if at all, ever black and white. So it's hard to take aside these conversations. The topics go on and everyone has an opinion, and like celebrate that.
And the opinions matter. Like, I encourage you to share and express your opinion too, because a lot of times, especially with legislators, they actually don't know. And I'm not trying to be an asshole here, but they don't know. And they actually do appreciate when people stand up and kind of speak to them. And I would encourage you to also not speak down to them. And I know that's really hard sometimes when you're dealing with something so intimate and so close to you like cannabis. But the more we can show mutual respect, the better we represent our whole industry. And honestly, the further we get. I know we do have to get emotional sometimes, and emotions do speak, but like, making sure you're showing up and kind of speaking from your heart, but also in a professional way to represent this medicine as a whole. Like, it isn't just you. It's like you're representing us, like all of us.
That's really what it should be. It should be a committee that's almost elected state to state, where we pick 3 to 5 people in each state that represent ours. And it's tough not to get this corrupted, but there's guys that I think of come to the top of my head, Prefer Gardens, guys that if any state is looking to write a cultivation, right, and really wants to figure out how to do this properly, yeah, that's the guy to talk to.
Right.
And then there's some guys up in the Emerald Cup. Yeah, those would be the guys to talk to about outdoor and greenhouse.
Absolutely.
And now combine some guys that have different aspects. And these are 35, 40, 20 plus year in the industry focused on this. Like, we should take their opinions.
Yeah, and we should pay them for it. They're
Yes.
experts. They're absolute experts. And these governments do have the funding for it. They just we need to just set these experts and allow them to give their opinion in a respectful way and be taken seriously and be utilized for their literal decades and decades of expertise. Like, we don't need somebody who's just like Googling things and going, I think this would work.
Well, this is what they did it wrong, so we're going to do it wrong like them.
Right. Like, we do have so many experts in such a diversity of fields in cannabis that, yeah, we just need to utilize them and make it safe for them to speak on it.
Yeah. And we need someone who, just like what you were speaking on with how that thing smokes for the, what is it? The key of smokability? What's it called?
The Science of Smokeability.
The Science of Smokability, knowing that that's not the way we smoke weed.
Yeah.
We need people from this industry representing the industry properly.
Yeah.
It's so much outsider speculation. It's all the little things. Like, even when you talk to cultivators, and I go back to that with guys like, Dave from Preferred, how many plant count? What's really realistic? What are the real numbers? What's the max someone would really need? What's the minimum? Because they're guessing. There's this guessing game. And then it's whoever they've consulted. Who is that person? What were they doing previously? Were they working for an MSO, or were they actually a cultivator? What position did they really hold? And it's just, I look to people like you, where for testing, when they roll out testing labs, you should be someone that they speak to, and there should be a committee of people. And these people speak to every state as state rolls out recreational legalization, whatever it is.
Oh, yeah. I love that idea. And yeah, there's just so many brilliant minds that, yeah, if we could just have a panel. And I know in New Hampshire, when they proposed having a panel of decision makers, it was like mostly law enforcement. And I was like, where did we miscommunicate here? And luckily that didn't make it through, but I was like, oh my God, we're so far off from being anywhere close to in a good spot here.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's coming in with being scared. You can tell that's them coming in saying, God, we cannot let this get out of hand. And so this is how we're entering the space. Oh man.
Yeah, it's not good.
That's tough to meet in the middle somewhere.
It's tough.
Holy shit.
I think they're gonna have a program out of force just because they're literally an island. I should say we're literally an island in New England. And like, people are growing, people are smoking, people are driving all the way through. That we're just losing money. And I think, unfortunately, it comes down to finances. At the end of the day, they're going to be like, we're losing too much money on this. So
it's always how
it's
it
not
happens.
about the people, but we're losing way too much money. So
that's how federal legalization is going to happen.
Yeah.
They're going to finally get to a threshold that they're saying, we need to tap this.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you get into what you're doing now? Like, let's go through your schooling or your path.
Yeah, I'll skip some of the boring stuff. But I was working in the biotech industry in Massachusetts, and I was like doing the same thing every day. But on the side, I was always like making tinctures, making teas, smoking a ton of weed, like using natural products. But I never like thought that could be something I pursued. But somebody I worked with, somebody in their family was a natural product grad student at the University of Rhode Island. So I went there and I toured, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to study natural products and understand how nature interacts with the body. Because there's so much from an evolutionary standpoint of how we've co-evolved with plants and animals to have all these different receptors and mechanisms for nature to interact with us. And I used to read about it, but like not really understand it. And I was kind of obsessed with it. So I wanted to know more about it. So when I went to grad school, I was studying this medicinal plant garden that had never been studied before and extracting all of these traditional medicinal plants and then screening them against for new antibiotics or new antifungals or just new drugs in general. And I was never able to study weed, but I always wanted to. But my second to last year of grad school, I was able to start studying hemp. And that was really cool. I started studying topicals and what enhanced penetration and what made the best therapeutic topicals, comparing different brands and comparing ones that I was formulating. And then my last year of grad school, the university had a cannabis program that they were releasing. And everyone was just like, oh, like Riley should be the one to teach some of these classes because they needed teaching assistants to like make videos and like help people understand things. So I started making videos and I slayed. Like I was doing pretty good. Like it was like I had a lot of fun with it. I loved doing it and the students loved doing it. It was super engaging. I loved talking about cannabis. And then the pandemic hit. And I had to go home for the first time as a scientist, like out of the lab. I loved working in the lab. So I had to go home for the first time. Wasn't really teaching much anymore. And this app called TikTok showed up. And I just started making videos about how weed works in the body and all of these different therapeutic aspects of cannabis. And also like speaking as a stoner and a consumer about how this kind of science interacts with the human experience. And the TikTok channel just kind of blew up. And eventually I got my first job in the cannabis industry from my TikTok because of my ability to communicate science. And they needed somebody not only to be a scientist, but also to be a communicator about the science that we were doing. So that's how I kind of entered the industry. I worked at a few companies and then eventually started a research and education nonprofit that's focused on connecting the cannabis industry, cannabis consumers, and academia, and communicating between all of us so that we can know what research is going on, participate in research, and do research that is as relevant as possible to cannabis consumers. So that's kind of where we're at now. The nonprofit's called the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy, or NAP. You can call us NAP. And that's kind of what I'm still doing today.
I love that. No, that's what we need. We need more of that. Could you get into the why we get the munchies? I love this because I love how your videos intertwine. A lot of it is research and really cool in-depth stuff. And then a lot of it is also like, this is why you feel this way. Or, hey, do you ever get this symptom? Well, this is why. And it's just so relatable. I go video to video on your profile, honestly, and I'll just keep watching new stuff. And then some of them just make me giggle because it's so relatable to like, oh my God, like that makes so much sense. I never thought about it that way. Just really the cool zoom out effect. A lot of times when you talk about why something happens, for me, it's like, oh, that's the zoom out effect. I'm seeing it from a perspective now of like, this is why this happens. Not just, well, when I go right, I turn, it's.
Well, I think that's the coolest thing about cannabis. The coolest thing is that we feel the pharmacology happening like very strongly. So I think it's more fun to learn about because if something like gives you the munchies or takes away the munchies or makes you feel really awake or makes you feel really asleep, like that's something we feel. So then we learn about the science. We're like, oh, that's cool because that was happening inside my body. Like I took in those molecules and it changed something and made me feel that way. So I think it's just this really unique situation where even something like CBD, I think CBD gets a lot of crap because you don't feel CBD like you feel THC. And as humans, we really like that feedback of like, take something, feel something. Like we love drugs. That's why we love drugs. So I think CBD, it has so many medicinal benefits, but because you don't feel it the same way as THC, I think it gets kind of pushed aside a lot of the time, which is too bad.
What do you think about Delta 8, Delta 9?
I feel strongly about Delta 8 and Delta 9. And I'm not trying to be a hater. I'm really not. But like everything I do is to represent the plant. Everything I do is to represent the plant and to advocate for access to the plant. And I feel like Delta 8 is just putting a bad name to what we represent and what we've worked towards. And if we made quality products and if I knew it was just Delta 8 in there, I'd feel differently. But I know it's not the case, and I don't like the way that we're handling that part of the industry. So if we can change it and produce quality products consistently, that's fine. But I think we need to focus more on getting everyone access to the natural product, and then we can start doing science experiments. But like, we need access to the plant right now for everyone.
Because what's happening?
With Delta 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, so with Delta 8, the way it's being produced is we're taking CBD isolate and we're adding acids and heat, and it's converting the CBD into Delta 8 THC, which is almost exactly the same as Delta 9 THC, which is the one found in the cannabis plant, except one single double bond is in a separate location, a different location, but that's it. It's one bond is moved. So it's like 1/3 as strong as regular THC. But apart from that, like, there's nothing inherently bad about the molecule. I think, again, like, if people were producing it correctly, the molecule did nothing bad. I think we're just not doing our due diligence getting quality products out to people. And especially when we attribute cannabis to medicine, we're kind of, we're on the border of medicine with some of those Delta 8 products that have other adulterants in it that we don't know what they are. We don't know if they're bad for you. We don't know. Maybe they're good for you. I don't know, but they're scary in my opinion.
It's this like epidemic we keep going through where like every couple years now we have THCA. We had Delta 8, Delta 9. Before that, there was like spice and all just on and on of like people manipulating science for legalization and money factor, and health factor is way down on that list.
And it's an access issue. Like, I can't say this enough times. It's an access issue. Anyone who lives in a state with access to quality cannabis is not using a Delta 8 product ever. Well, I shouldn't say ever. I'm sure there's some people out there.
There's outliers for every combo. It doesn't matter what you say. Just
but if you
that.
have access to the quality natural product that you know is safe and like that is going to provide you with that great feeling from using cannabis, why would you be using a Delta 8 THC gummy or a flower that's been sprayed with Delta 8? Like, why would you be doing that?
What do you think some of the biggest red flags are in the industry that you've seen? Things that are just misconceptions, stuff where people overlook it and you're like, oh my God, this is, just something we need to be watching out for, something you've seen recently, and, anything come to mind?
The only thing I could just reiterate more than anything is like, potency, like how much THC is in a product is not the gauge of quality. And it's so often taken as the gauge of quality. And often I've found the opposite, at least for my body, like a more balanced product usually vibes with my body the best. But I think I don't want to like talk any shit on anyone. But yeah, I think other than that, that's my one thing.
Could we touch on THC a little bit and how terpenes have an effect almost as potent as THC alone has, or there's an entourage? Like, what do you think?
Absolutely. So I love to think of, when I'm thinking of the cannabis plant and thinking of it as like energy being distributed to these different molecules. So if we were the cannabis plant and we were producing a ton of THC, really it's producing THCA, but we're going to say, producing a ton of THC, it's funneling all of its energy towards that one molecule. It's not producing a diversity of molecules. It's not being resilient by producing that diversity of molecules. Instead, it's like all being pushed to one thing because we're pushing it towards that one thing. We've learned how to cultivate to push that energy towards THC. But if we can push the energy towards the terpene or the aromatic profile, the smells, which actually, when we diversify what the plant is producing, whether it's different cannabinoids or different terpenes, it's not only great for our body because we have these different molecules interacting with different receptors in our body, but it's great for the plant too. It's now more resilient too to different bacteria, fungi, microorganisms, because now those molecules are being produced as defense molecules. Like, that's why the plant's producing it. So if we encourage the plant to produce this diversity of molecules, it's great for the plant. It's going to be resilient. It's probably going to smell awesome. And yeah, it's not going to be subject to a lot of these things that we're seeing in a lot of grow rooms of things kind of taking over and that balance being disrupted. If we have that diversity of molecules and then we smoke it and we inhale it and put it into our body, instead of being like a a bullet, like a 9mm bullet, I don't know, to your body. Instead, it's like a shotgun where it's hitting like a lot of different things instead of just one target really, really, really hard. Instead, it's like separating those medicinal components and really balancing out the medicinal benefits. So in my opinion, like nature in general, to be most wild and to be most resilient, it needs to produce the greatest diversity of compounds. And that's the same with the human body as well. And that's not usually how we look at medicine. Like if we look at the pharmaceutical model of medicine, it's a single compound on a single target. That's what we think of. Take this drug to help with this condition, right? But with cannabis, we have this diversity of molecules. And guess what? Cannabis is great for a lot of conditions. It's great for a diversity of conditions and a diversity of people. There's almost no adverse effects, especially if we have that great chemical diversity. So I think it enhances like the safety, but also the medicinal benefits of the plant if we can encourage it to grow as diverse of a profile as possible.
Sounds like a healthier overall plant too.
Yeah.
Like when you break it down that way, it's like, oh, that's a healthy plant, which that's what I want to ingest as a consumer is the healthiest plant, not something that's been stripped away and targeted for just THC.
Yeah.
It just shows you the consumer. It's all about education and us taking it in. If you enjoy cannabis, do science or do some research, read some science on why you like what you like and how to actually navigate this.
There's so much to it. I think also that's a really important thing to say because like we've been talking a lot of like science and a lot of really complex things. But again, this is the opposite of what we've been taught medicine should be like especially in the American lifestyle we live. It's like, oh, something's wrong with you, fix it immediately. Instead, cannabis is like, you kind of have to explore yourself in a way. You have to explore the plant in a way. You have to take that time and that energy. And especially if you're new to cannabis, maybe you're writing things down. Maybe you're actually like really thinking about how you feel on a substance for the first time in a long time. You're really trying to integrate that experience. And I think that's a really important aspect of the medicine is to take the time to feel it and to slow down. Cannabis helps us slow down, but you also need to be receptive to slowing down. Like take it seriously and like think about it. Think about how you feel. Think about how you felt 10 minutes ago before you consumed cannabis and like taking that very intentional aspect, especially again, if you're new and you're really starting to explore it. Cause I think a lot of people feel that like intense anxiety sometimes, or like your brain is really connected to your body and that can feel like anxiety, but you can learn to channel some of that anxiety. And I'm not saying for everyone, like severe anxiety is very severe, but if you're feeling like a little bit of anxiety, I've found that channeling that and using it, like cannabis can help you be very aware of your thoughts and feelings. And as you get more used to how that feels and how you can implement that and like use it as motivation and as enlightenment, I think you just have to be patient with yourself and not expect it to be like, Overnight, you're first hit you take, boom, there you go. You figured it out. You did weed and you're better. It's like, it's so much more complicated.
We keep going back to black or white. I want an easy fix, I swear. And it's nothing is that. It's all nuance and you have to be your best advocate. And then you have to pay attention to people like you and people in this space who have so much passion for it that they've dedicated their professional career that could be doing anything else, right? It's not like, well, everything else failed, so I'm in cannabis. Yeah. No, it's like, I absolutely love this and I'm great at what I do. And now I'm merging the two.
Oh, 100%. And it's like, it's so ingrained in us. Like, so many of us couldn't work anywhere else. Like it would just be
want to.
Yeah, no. And it's like, and a lot of people aren't making a lot of money. And I really wish there was more opportunity for people to make more money because people are working hard and deserve to be paid for the work that they're doing. But despite, people persist in this industry and they're very, very resilient people. So just kudos to everyone still surviving and thriving as much as you can out there because it's not easy.
Well, you could honestly say that, well, was it harder before or after legalization? So they were thriving or some people were in the worst conditions where they were getting busted, raids, robberies, all the R's. you know? And then on the flip side, now we have the problems of, well, cannabis is worth about a third what it was, or a quarter for some people. And there's pounds going for the same price as ounces. Literally, you can buy pounds at some places. And then there's also pounds going for 8,000.
Right.
So it's just the market is all over the place. It's so crazy what we've seen in the past few years. I do want to get into this. We've seen a candy craze where like the biggest terp right now on the market, the biggest, would you say flavonoid? How would you?
Yeah, flavorant. Yeah, I think that definitely would fall under the exotics, and I think that's an ester that's a type of molecule, like the subclass of molecule that's responsible for that sweet candy. And I mean, I think it is a little bit of a craze, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. Like when something's new and hot, and if we are able to, you're talking about selective breeding for these flavorants, like that is an example of that. And even if we don't have the testing to always back that up, that sweet candy smell is due in part to these flavorants. So we are starting to already do that selective breeding, whether we know it or not, which is kind of fun that we see that in real time with the research coming out.
Do you think it has anything to do with the age group of the consumer? Meaning like they grew up with vape pens, they grew up with, terpene things, cotton candy, sweets that are very different from what a 45 or 50-year-old grew up on, right?
I never thought about that. It is like a vape cart. Yeah.
Kevin Jodry, we had on the podcast, and there's people like you and Kevin and just certain people that I'm able to sit down with. And it's a blessing in life that I get to spend time and have these conversations with you. Right. And Kevin's someone who opened that up for me, where he starts to explain why cannabis smells a certain way. Well, do you know why OG smells a certain way? And he starts to break down the terroir.
Oh, so cool.
And the pests in that area and why this has to smell this way. And then he goes into different varieties, and it just started to really, then we tied it into, well, let's talk about the candy craze right now with lemon cherry gelato and every version of Runts or lemon cherry, and how the smoking community is a young community. It always is that big population, and that they grew up on these terpenes, where the older community might have liked the OGs. Well, yeah, that was something they grew. And he starts to break it down where I was like, this makes so much sense.
Oh, that is so cool.
And a little bit predictable then.
Yeah.
Because for a cultivator, it's like this thing's changing so fast under our feet. How do you predict a year ahead? Because that's what you're doing. So when you're chasing seeds or breeding, you're thinking next season or 2 seasons. Yeah.
The Tide Pod kids, Chem Notes, probably a good pairing, maybe like
the Eden, whatever. I don't even know this. It's I sound like my dad. That's fucked. But it really is, because I'm like, they're eating the crazy candies and they're smoking the vape pen. But it is true. It's just like, I love that as a cultivator, though, that I'm like, if that's true, then that's a predictor.
It's so cool. It's a great perspective. I have not thought of it like that. But also, yeah, like how the smell of that. And we talked about like your memory being shaped by smells, and how these vape pens and blowing those clouds of cherry watermelon smoke or vape growing up is just like ingrained in their brains.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and just that flavor profile was also probably in the candy, and then also in the cereal, and then also in other aspects of life where it's like, oh, I like that. I've been used to that. And like our age groups, introduced into different profiles. So,
that's really interesting. You're talking about this too, because at one of the events that we went to earlier this year, NECAN Boston, we always like to do things where people can engage in our research, and just like fun things like drop this and this if you like this strain better than this one. And one of them was aroma profiles and age we were looking at. And the older people did have like distinct clustering, which we thought was really, really interesting, because there was like 3 age groups, and there was some clustering. So maybe I'll look at that in a different light when I get back, now that I'm thinking of it.
It's
like
so
this.
Interesting. Yeah. It reminds me a little of fashion when they talk about it's all cyclical, and that, there's predictors of fashion for what the colors are going to be 2 seasons from now. And this is what they are. And yeah, it's just so interesting. What are some things navigating cannabis people should watch out for?
Yeah, like what to look for when you're purchasing cannabis. Yeah, I think from a dispensary, if that's where you're purchasing cannabis, I would always start with like 2 or 3 different varieties and really try to buy as diverse things as possible to start to lock into what flavors you might like. Depending on your area, you know, some dispensaries are deli style. You can smell things. A lot of them aren't still. Another shout out to Vermont. A lot of them are in Vermont. But if it is deli style, you know, definitely follow your nose and aroma. But if it is not, yeah, just look for, even if it was like a classic, you know, indica, sativa and hybrid, just start to try a diversity of things, but also from a diversity of cultivators as well. Because as you very well know, like one strain or variety grown in by one cultivator is going to be completely different than another. And the level of quality is going to be really different between them too. And also to try out different consumption methods. Like I don't love edibles. They don't vibe well with my body. I don't like the way they make me feel. Other people only like edibles and they hate the way that smoking or vaping makes them feel. So just like, again, being patient with yourself, keeping good track of what you're doing, and then just trying a diversity of products and taking note of which ones mesh the best with your body, and incorporate CBD if you can. And I'm not just saying that because everybody says that, but like CBD is a very great anti-inflammatory and really adds to the benefits of cannabis like times 10. So
am I looking for a certain type of CBD in my product that's quality, or is it all similar? Like how do I distinguish if I'm getting good CBD?
Yeah, so this is tough. I mean, I think it's always better if you can purchase flower that has more of a balanced CBD and THC profile, but it's really hard to find flower that's balanced. Like it's almost not available anywhere. Like it's very difficult to find.
It's because we literally took the medical aspect out of cannabis, and it kills some of us that are older who are like, no, we believe in this. That's what we got on this mountain for. And we've taken that and said, oh, well, you've hunted down this amazing CBD strain or this balanced strain. Well, it's not going to sell for any more, and we probably actually don't want it. And not even looking into the benefits or like, have you tried that? Have you smoked Charlotte's Web? Like a bunch of cultivators I knew were bringing in CBD plants, and we were smoking them side by side and trying to just see what is this about? What do you feel anything? You know, that would be the question. We would literally pass around joints and I'd be like, how do you feel? You know?
Can I tell you something crazy?
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of people don't know about CBD is smoking CBD is very different than any other type of consumption method with CBD, because during the smoking process, some of that CBD does convert to THC, and you're actually taking in more THC when you're smoking hemp, specifically smoking it. And that's why a lot of people, like, I have friends that are so sensitive to THC, they'll smoke a hemp joint and be like, I feel stoned.
Yeah, that's how I felt. And I'm like, dude, I kind of feel like this feels like weed.
Yeah. So
are you telling me though that I could pair a little bit of CBD flower with my THC flower and I would actually get higher?
There's actually research on that it's true. When you mix CBD with THC, it does get you higher. Also, there's research that dry herb vaping gets you higher compared to just smoking. But I think that makes sense because if you think of it like per puff, when you're dry herb vaping, you're selectively vaporizing the active compounds, which are the cannabinoids and terpenes. So it's essentially like vaping a concentrate because you're only getting those active compounds. Whereas when you're smoking, you're just fully combusting all of that organic material. So like by puff weight volume, there's less THC.
Do you find yourself
and where it's converted to CBN during
moving through more product though? When I was a big Volcano guy for years.
I love my Volk.
I absolutely great product, right? And the OG product for flower connoisseurs, for vape.
Yeah.
And so when you'd fill up the balloon, right, and you're passing it around, it was such a social vape experience. Some of my buddies growing up, like that was their preferred method. And you know, they're like, try the grapefruit.
I love this sound. That's so funny.
And then, you know, we had the digital one, but we started with, and it's just really cool to see. I love that you're big into like your choice of how to experience cannabis.
Oh my gosh, so many people when we started talking about the science of smokeability, the amount of messages we got were like, well, why on earth would you study this? Nobody should be smoking. Everybody should be dry herb vaping. And it's like, That's not the point. The point is most people are still smoking. It's still the number one most preferred consumption method and the most traditionally used method of consumption. It is incredibly relevant. And just because some physicians don't believe that people should be smoking doesn't mean that we shouldn't be researching it. Because especially with like Science of Smokeability, there may be ways to cultivate, to dry and cure, to make it a better and safer smoking experience as well, and limit the exposure to any potential carcinogens or any of these negative compounds that are produced in the smoking process.
We have to look at it like food.
Yeah.
We really do. We have to look at it like, no, people are consuming these foods. So is that an active ingredient that causes cancer or not? It's not just, well, just stay away from it. We don't want to put it in the dark corner and don't pay attention to it.
Right.
People like to do that in this industry sometimes. Is like, we don't like to talk about that. It's like, no, that's not how it works in science.
Exactly. And like, our testing labs should probably be testing products in their final form that they're taken in. You know, maybe we should be doing smoke studies in testing labs and vape studies in testing labs and understanding more about like this expanded entourage effect that we're talking about, because there are additional molecules being produced that are relevant to the experience, both pros and cons to these things. But like, we need to be studying it. There's millions of people putting it into our lungs every day.
Is there any schools in the US that are studying this, that if you were, because I look at it like we're getting the first generation of people growing up that are saying, I want to be a hash maker for a living. I want to be a grower. I want to do science in the cannabis space. But all these professions in cannabis, and now they're in high school now. And this is a real thing where if they go into college and they decide to go into a real professional field, they could build something great.
Oh, yeah. There are definitely universities. I know like University of Maryland's big for like the health sciences aspect of cannabis. LSSU, Lake Superior State, they're big on like extraction and kind of more of what you're talking about. On that end of the industry. Michigan in general, shout out to Michigan.
Yeah.
They're doing a dope job on the education game. There's multiple universities that have programs for cannabis that are really, really awesome. I've talked to a lot of students and they love it too. They do projects like building a new hydroponic system and then measuring the output of cannabinoids and terpenes. Oh, and I'm like, do you know how much I would have killed to do this in undergrad?
Oh my God. That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and to actually be able to do that test and not on lettuce.
Right.
Or, you know, dandelions or whatever the subject matter is, actually cannabis, because that's what we're testing for.
100%. And like literally use methodologies that are used in laboratories in the industry, and use tools and machinery and analytical equipment that are actually being used. So we have trained people just entering the industry ready to rip.
So I want to tell you a story, and it'll get into a topic I want to ask you about. I went to a dinner that was cooked by a Michelin star chef from Germany, came into Amsterdam and did a cannabis dinner for us. Infused.
Wow. 6
courses. And he said everything ranges from 40 milligrams to 60 milligrams. I'm like, per course? And he's like, yeah, 6 courses. So I'm like, oh, we're going to the moon. Here we go. Right. For me, anything over 100 milligrams, I'm like, I look at it like a roller coaster where you get on and you don't get to just get off. It finishes and then you get off.
Yeah.
You're on for the ride.
Yeah.
There's no getting off mid roller coaster. It's taking off. And so I watch him set this up, and he's talking about nano emulsification. And I'm like, oh, yeah, sounds good, bro. You know, honestly, I'm smoking. I'm already partaking. And he starts to bring out dishes. I got through the first dish. I swear by the time I was taking the last bite of the first appetizer, I was like, I'm feeling it already. And not like in a little way, like, yo, I'm lit. And I just started this little appetizer that was super fancy. So, you know, it's already like 5 bites, you know, something. I was every dish was like, oh, you climbing the mountain.
Wow.
What's nano emulsification?
Yeah. So nano emulsification is essentially taking a particle size. If we think of like a drop of olive oil, huge particle size. But nano emulsification is taking that, making it much, 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 much smaller, and then typically encapsulating that particle in something that makes it easier for your body to just absorb. So now you have a smaller particle and easier to absorb, so it can absorb into your body a lot faster than traditional edibles that might take upwards of an hour and a half, 2 hours to feel the peak effects. Now, as you're saying, it's like 10, 15 minutes. And
it was unbelievable.
Yeah. Also, that sounds like my nightmare, but I'm really glad that you enjoyed it.
Well, I'm just tripping because you start to ask yourself, like, am I tricking myself in my head? You know what I'm saying? You're like, do I feel it? Do you feel it? Who's feeling it? But I'm finishing the first couple bites and I'm like, no, I'm definitely feeling it. And I'm starting to get the little bit of this going, you know, where you're.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I greened out the first time on an edible that I made. It was actually
dosed yourself.
Literally, it was infused butter, and I was eating pierogies and they were so good that I just like kept eating the butter. And then when people say like the edible hits, I mean, I was knocked off my feet when the edible hit and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I got the spin so bad. The room just started going crazy and I ended up vomiting from that edible experience. And I had heard of people vomiting in the past and I was like, oh, well, I don't know if that's real. Nope, it's 100% real, like 100% real.
Someone was like, is it real? They're patting you on the back.
No, my dream would be like a good course pairing with flour that goes well with the course. But that's just because I'm not an edible person, but it sounds really nice for quick acting.
It was phenomenal.
Yeah, kind of staying honestly, in real time.
The only edible experience I've had that redeemed all other experiences. I could tell you 15 times where I was like, this is an overdose. You know, I know that nothing's going to happen, but I'm, you know, it's funny. It's the same with when you roll a joint. You're like, put 3 grams or 4 grams in there. Well, if you take that same push into edibles, it's a whole different thing. You know,
it's a whole different thing. Wait, real quick. Have you ever tried extracting in olive oil? And have you noticed anything unique about extracting in olive oil? And this is to any listeners too, because I know a lot of people with olive oil stories. And then I was recently reading research about how olive oil is this kind of unique oil that has many different size fats in it. So it's able to extract a greater diversity of things compared to other oils like vegetable oil that might, or like even coconut oil that might more selectively extract things. So I think that olive oil like enhances the entourage effect by extracting more things. And that's why things made with olive oil hit you like a absolute freight train. Like they're insane every time I've tried things made with olive oil.
Yeah. We used to take stems and they would put them in like, I drink gin, but gin or vodka bottles. And once in a while make a cocktail. And what would happen is all the crystals would detach from the stems and you would pull the stems out. You would run the alcohol through like a small mesh filter, but it would almost sparkle.
Whoa.
Because you'd see the crystals inside and one drink, like, you know, old school bro tech, you know, when you're a grower and you're like, stick that in there and see what happens.
Wow.
But you know, it's just so interesting. As far as females in cannabis and females using cannabis, are there any recommendations you have to other females in cannabis as far as using it or hunting a strain that works or?
Well, one, I would say always find other females to go to for advice on like, if you have trouble like listening to your body and reading your body, like find a woman mentor, a health mentor that can kind of help you through that. Cause like women are healers and cannabis is a female plant that we love and utilize. And I think there's a lot of feminine energy there. But also like just to be aware, especially of like your cycle and where you're at and your pain tolerance and how much you might need to like switch up your dosing depending on how you're feeling and where you're at. And just to, again, like be really in touch with your body to be able to be flexible with your dosing in that way. And yeah, I think that's the big thing I would say about women in cannabis. And don't be afraid to be loud about using weed. I think for a long time, the stigma was worse with women using cannabis and especially smoking. But I think we're starting to see it more and more normalized. And I think that's awesome.
I had a buddy use cannabis and he got to a point where he was smoking so much hash that he attributed it to like a endocannabinoid issue that he got. where he can now not smoke weed at all.
CHS?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's being misdiagnosed or diagnosed properly. Could you dive into a little bit of that?
Yeah, actually, I just released a study on CHS too. It's like available. If anyone out there has CHS, you can take part in it so we can learn more about exactly what's happening, because we're trying to figure this out, because it is real. It is happening. There's a lot of theories that it has to do with like pesticides or sprayed cannabis. We don't know the answer to that. But what we do know is it's real. We need to take it seriously. The only thing that helps people, like there's these episodes of cyclical vomiting. So like you literally cannot stop vomiting. And it's really difficult for cannabis consumers, because what do we do often when we feel sick and we feel nauseous? We use cannabis, we smoke, right? So a lot of people are actually perpetuating the issue because they don't know about CHS. And the only way to help the symptoms is to stop using cannabis. And then for just short term, taking really hot showers and putting hot pepper cream on your stomach are the two other things that help people. And the reason this helps is because you have a receptor called the TRPV1 receptor that's activated by hot peppers and hot things like hot water. So when that receptor is activated, people don't feel sick, but it's just temporary. They get out of the shower and they feel sick again. They go to the emergency room. They're severely dehydrated because they've been vomiting for a long time. And it likely does have to do with a dysregulation of your endocannabinoid system. You know, if we talk about the ECS and the role of it to maintain balance in the body, too much of anything is bad for you. And it might throw the system out of whack in a way that normally cannabis helps with nausea and vomiting. And we've thrown it out of whack of now it's causing nausea and vomiting. There's also research that there's a genetic component of this, a genetic predisposition. So it's not like every single person who consumes THC is going to get CHS. It's likely a really, really, really small portion of the population that is genetically susceptible to it. So especially if you have like a sibling or something that has CHS and you're also a consumer, that's probably when you want to start just being aware of your consumption and just knowing it exists. And medical professionals too are misdiagnosing it all the time. So the goal of the study that we're doing is to provide infographics and flyers to emergency rooms so that they can diagnose it quickly and treat people as quickly as possible without putting people through the ringer of saying, try this drug, you might have this, you might have this. We want to be like, if someone's experiencing these symptoms and these things help, they might have CHS, try this drug, it'll likely work.
It makes total sense. I mean, you got to be your best advocate. You really do.
And it also as a community, like I've heard a lot of people saying it's not real and like trying to, put it up. And I get you're trying to like protect the plant, but at the same time, we do need to be mature and say, if it is something that's really happening, like we do need to look into that further.
Makes me think too that
the data.
Concentrates are now becoming so prevalent that maybe we didn't see it before because of that, right? The doses were lower. If you constantly, no matter how much flower you smoke, your dose is going to be lower consistently than if you are consuming massive amounts of hash. That's just not and then also eating an edible. And then also who knows? We go back into it's never black or white, right?
Right.
Yeah. Riley, as far as how people can reach out to you and follow you and just pay attention to the studies you're doing and just the honestly amazing work you're doing where anyone in this space should be paying attention to this and what you're up to. Thank
you so much. Yeah. So on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, my handle is Cannabichem, CANNABICHEM. I already mentioned our nonprofit website, which is also linked on all my profiles, which is appliedpharmacognosy.org. And I also have a podcast called The Bioactive Podcast, or just Bioactive, where I talk about really nerdy things in the cannabis space. So if you really like to nerd out, check that out. This wasn't enough. Yeah. So those are the ways you can find me.
Yeah. Could you leave us with a piece of advice?
Oh, man. Grow weed at home and learn from the plant, because you can learn a lot about yourself from really paying attention and taking care of this plant. Like, she wants to teach us. We just need to listen and listen to your own body as well, because your body's also trying to talk to you. So give it some time to listen.
First smoke of the day, Cannabichem. It was my pleasure. I'm glad that I reached out when I saw you coming to California.
I'm glad you did too. Thanks so much for having me on. This has been so fun.
We do behind the scenes. All that's off the mic, fsotd.com, but we're going to go there now. Thank you for coming on.
Mad love.
Peace.
So if you like this video and you want to see more videos just like it, I need you to click right up here and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.
Yo, First Smoke family, right here.